Hey guys, welcome back to Release the Craftin. Silly here with another episode of Storycraft. Storycraft, if you guys don't know, if you're just joining me for the first time, welcome. But it's just a segment, a series, where I tell you a story and I do a craft. So you're watching me do a craft, I'm going to tell you a story. Today I'm telling you guys the story of Donkey Skin, which is an interesting story, and I think we'll get into why it's an interesting story as we get there. But yeah, it's just a story that I had in my mind and I wanted to tell it. So here we are. I do have a couple more requests to get through, so I am going to work on those coming up here soon. So if there is a story that you would like to hear in this segment, leave it in the comments below and I will add it to my list and make sure that it gets up before the series ends, because it's going to end this year, I think. We're going up to 100 episodes, and we're rapidly approaching as time seems to be flying by. I hope that you guys are really enjoying the series, because it's been a lot of fun to do. I really enjoy it, and I don't know if it'll survive in, like, a different evolution of the series in some way, shape, or form going forward, but, you know, we'll see. We'll see when we get there. I don't know why I'm already planning for the end of the year when we're here at the end of May. At the time of recording. You might be watching this at a different time. But yeah, I'm just in this little spiral, I guess. So, at any rate, yes, I'm telling you the story of Donkey Skin, which is, very Cinderella-esque, and I think you guys will see. There's actually a plethora of stories that are right in the Cinderella wheelhouse, surprisingly. In fact, like, I could probably do like 100 episodes of just Cinderella stories. That's how many there are, because every culture has a Cinderella story of some kind, or a, several versions of a Cinderella story of some kind. So yeah, Donkey Skin is another one of those stories, but I like this story. I think it is very interesting, and we'll go into it at the end, why I chose this story and all that stuff. But first, we're just going to jump right into it, because I've been rambling. Also, I have a Patreon, so if you would like to support the channel, you can check out my Patreon. And if you don't want to join Patreon, I also have a coffee, so if you want to go to my coffee page and just buy me a coffee, that would be cool too, because this channel definitely runs on caffeine. But yeah, that's all the ways you can support, in addition to my Etsy store and all the other things, which will be linked down below if you're interested. They're in the description box. So at any rate, our story takes place, like good stories do, in the way long ago. And it starts with a king and a queen. But not just any king and queen. We're talking about the most powerful, the most badass, the most beautiful couple, like superpower couple. King and queen, right? Like, their kingdom is prosperous. They have no enemies, because when they do, they leave no trace. So they are super fearsome, super mighty. They are a power couple by definition. The subjects of their kingdom are happy. The economy is prosperous. Like, everybody's doing really well. They're both incredibly good looking. So, like, everyone's like, not only do we have the best king and queen, we have the prettiest king and queen. So, like, we're winning on all accounts. And in addition to having this massive kingdom with all this prosperity, they have this huge stable full of horses, but one stall in the stable in particular is very special, you guys. It's the most decked out, the most opulent of all the stable stalls, because it contains a donkey. But not just any donkey. The prettiest damn donkey you've ever seen. Like, this donkey is a 10 on the scale of donkeys. Not only, like, in addition to having a nice shiny coat and, you know, being of a nice size and having great big ears, all the things that are really important when you are assessing the attractiveness of donkeys. This donkey is very unique in the sense that it doesn't poop. Well, it poops, but it doesn't poop. It poops gold. This donkey literally shits gold. And that's part of the reason the kingdom is so prosperous, because they don't actually need to, like, find money when they have a donkey just shitting gold. So this donkey is the prize of the king and his kingdom, because they have an endless supply of wealth coming out of this donkey. And unlike most couples in our stories, the king and queen aren't actually desperately seeking a child. They managed to have a child. It did take them a little while to give birth to a child, but they did. Well, the queen did, not the king. But he was there. But they only have one child ever. But turns out, this child, who happens to be a girl, who will forever be nameless, so the princess, she she's perfect as well. In fact, she's not just like the perfect baby in the sense of like they never have to worry about her crying excessively and she's perfectly healthy. No, she's the perfect baby because she has all the gifts. She has beauty. She has grace. She has a melodic voice, charm, all the things, charisma, the things, all the things that you think the pinnacle of princesses could be, she has. In fact, she has so many gifts and so many graces that even though she's a girl child and you know, the line of succession demands that there be a boy child, the couple, the king and queen, are actually very content to not even like go through the effort of trying to have another child. They're not stressing about not having another child because they are so content with how perfect their daughter is, which is very unusual for stories. But this wouldn't be a fairy tale without a dead parent. So, of course, as most things go, eventually time goes by and the queen gets struck with an illness. And as she is laying in her deathbed, all the doctors are unable to help her. The king is there by her side. He's a very diligent, dutiful husband. And her last words to her husband was a request that he promised her that once she's gone, he finds a woman who is more wise and more beautiful than she is to marry, to give him a proper heir for the throne. So she tells him basically like, promise me that you won't marry anybody else after me unless they are prettier and wiser than me, because that's the only way you're going to get a good heir, and that's what I want. And it's widely believed that the queen asked for this because she already knew she was like the top shit, right? Like she knew she was super pretty and super wise. So she didn't think he was going to ever remarry because who would be better than her? And I admire the confidence girl, like go off queen. But also she did go off. She died. So she dies. The king keeps his promise and he starts telling his advisors to scour the kingdom for someone who could be not just his wife's equal, but surpass his wife. So all of his people, you know, they're looking everywhere. They're looking across not just his kingdom, but all the kingdoms, trying to find someone prettier than their queen. And during this time of like the great queen hunt, the king is in mourning and he is grieving and he is absolutely bereft over the loss of his perfect princess queen wife. Because she was a princess before she was a queen. That's how that works. And in the meantime, his daughter, the princess, is growing up beautifully. She's coming along very swell. And it takes many years. Many women are brought before the king. And he's like, no, none of these are perfect for me. None of these are better than my perfect queen. Like, I need better. And none of these are better. And it gets to the point where the advisors are like, sire, we don't think anyone is going to be better than the queen. We think you just have to pick somebody because you need to have a son because you have a girl child. And so if she gets married, she's going to go away to whatever kingdom she marries into. And your kingdom will be without an heir. And if by some luck, by some chance, the prince that she chooses to marry decides to stay in your kingdom, well, their children could be, like, arguably illegitimate because they don't come from a male line. Because, you know, patriarchy's got a patriarchy. So the king's like, that's very sound advice. But I made my wife a promise. And I promised her I would only marry someone better than her. And name anyone who's better looking and wiser than my wife. And they were like, oh, we can't. And wouldn't you know it, but at that moment, his daughter, the princess, who has now come of age, comes in through the door, and he's like, you're kind of prettier than your mom. And she's like, what a weird way to give me a compliment. Thanks, Dad. And he's like, you have been giving me very sage advice lately. And she's like, I think I have. I appreciate that you're recognizing my achievements. And he's like, you know what? Who better than to be my next wife than you, my daughter? Because no one else could be prettier or wiser than my old wife than her child. That also happens to be my child. And the princess goes, and she turns around and she walks out because she's terrified at the idea of her father just so casually proposing to her in front of the entire court. And, she needed to get out of there. And she's not the only person who's shocked, you guys, because the entire court is a little shook. But because he's the king, nobody wants to say, like, hey, I don't think you should marry your daughter. That's not cool. But the king has his heart set on it. And a lot of people are, like, trying to be, like, you know, a little bit giving, a little bit, you know, sympathetic. Because they're like, man, he's just so racked with grief that his brain is all scrambled. And he'll come to his senses and realize that this is a bad plan. Spoiler alert, he doesn't. He's 100% all in. The princess, however, though, she walks away and she goes and talks to her nanny, her maid, a very old woman who happens to be in her service. And she tells her everything. And she's like, oh my God, I don't want to marry my dad. But he's convinced that I'm the only person who can replace my mom. And I don't want to be my mom's replacement either. And the nanny's like, okay, don't worry. Don't worry. We're going to call her the godmother. Her godmother's like, don't worry. Here's what you do. Go tell your father that you'll marry him if he meets your conditions. And then just give him an impossible condition that nobody can meet. And she's like, oh, that's a good idea. Do you have any suggestions on what I should ask for? And the godmother's like, tell him that you want a dress that's the color of the sky. And so she's like, okay, yeah. So she goes back to her dad and she says, you know what? I will only marry the person who could fulfill my request. And the dad's like, tell me what you want, my darling daughter, because I'm ready to make this happen. And she's like, I want a dress the color of the heavens. And I won't marry until I get a dress the color of the heavens. So she skips away thinking she's going to be okay. And the dad's like, call every tailor in the land to me at once. And he does. And then he commands them to make a dress in the color of the heavens. And they do, in fact. They use all of their artistic ability, all their artistic powers combined to make the most beautiful dress in the most beautiful shade of blue so that he can present that to her on the next day when she comes back to see him in court. And she's like, oh snap, I actually have another request. But let me just walk away and hang this up in my closet for a second while I think about it. So she dashes away to her godmother and she's like, he made a dress and it is the most beautiful dress I've ever seen. And it is the color of the sky. Like this didn't work out. Which, like, also, the color of the sky is typically, traditionally blue. I don't know if she could have worded that in a different way to maybe make it like all the colors of the sky, and maybe that would have been like a thing, but she just said sky, so it turned out blue. So when she goes back to her godmother's like, ask him for a dress the color of the moon. He surely can't give you anything like that. And again, the wording is not very specific here, or it's not vague enough, I think, because the moon is a gray rock. And I feel like that can be easily replicated as well. So the princess does. She goes back. She tells the king now she wants a dress made of, to look like the moon. And again, the king calls all the tailors, all the embroiderers, all the dressmakers. And after a course of 4 days, this one took a little bit longer, they present a dress that is the color of the moon, in a beautiful silvery color. It shines like it's full of the light of the moon. And she's like, oh shit. Runs back to her godmother. So the godmother's like, okay, this time demand that he make you a dress that is as bright as the sun. That's impossible. Because we all know how bright the sun is. And here, you see the wording? Better this time. So when the princess goes back and makes her demands, the king does the same thing, calls all the dressmakers, the butcher and the baker and the candlestick maker, all them people to show up to make a dress brighter than the sun. And when they do, because they do, it takes a week, but they do it, and the cloth is like spun out of gold and diamonds, so it does shine with its own light, and it is as bright and dazzling as the sun is. Like, it's so dazzling, it's hard to stare at it for a long time, but it's such a beautiful dress that she's absolutely flabbergasted by how beautiful the dress is. So this time she's like, I think I have one more request in me before we can settle this arrangement. And she runs back to her godmother, and her godmother's like, okay, this fucking asshole. Okay, here we go. I got it. Go to the king and tell him that you will only marry if he gives you the skin of his priceless donkey in the stable. Because the donkey is the source of the kingdom's wealth, so he won't give that up. That's shenanigans. So the princess goes back and she tells her dad, and her dad looks a little shook now because he's like, oh, making dresses in the colors of the sky, the moon, and the sun was like one thing, but my donkey? And so she leaves thinking she's safe, but she underestimates how deranged the king actually is, because the king is like, go skin that donkey and bring it to my daughter. So they bring her the donkey skin in her chambers. This time she doesn't have to appear in court. And the godmother comes to meet her to see the donkey skin. And she's like, okay, pretend, if you will, that you are actually going to marry the king now that he's met all your demands. But also, pack all your shit because you need to run away. So she gives her like a little magical chest, a little tiny chest that she can carry in her hands. But whatever you put into it fits. So it's like the TARDIS, bigger on the inside. And they fold up all the dresses, all of her jewels, all of her things, right? And then in addition to putting all of her stuff in there, the godmother actually gives her her wand, because turns out she's a fairy godmother. And she tells her, with this wand, you can keep the chest hidden, and then when you need it, you just tap the wand on the ground and the chest will appear, and you can get all your stuff out of it. So now it's like super magical, super extra layers of magic. And she tells her to take the donkey skin, which has been bespelled to help disguise her, but it'll also be an actual disguise. And basically the spell on top of it is that while she wears the donkey skin, no one will believe that she's a beautiful woman while wearing that donkey skin. So nobody will see her as the princess she is with the donkey skin on. So the princess does as she's told. She packs up everything. She takes the wand. She keeps that in her pocket. She gets the donkey skin ready. She goes and tells her dad, like, okay, prepare for a wedding because I'm definitely going to marry you for sure. And then in the dead of night, she dons the donkey skin, sneaks out of the palace. Nobody suspects her because she's wearing the donkey skin. So they're like, what a weird thing that we're watching, walk out of the castle gates right now. This raggedy girl in her raggedy donkey skin. And she dips off into the countryside. And she walks for many days and many nights until she's in another kingdom entirely, far away. And she continues to go to the kingdom after that because she's like, I need to get away from my father as far as possible so that he can never find me, because I will never, ever, ever, ever marry him. And like, yes, girl, absolutely walk across the world to get away from your crazy dad, right? So she manages to get to a farm, that's in the countryside in another kingdom far, far away. And while on the farm, she's passing all the farmhands who are like, ew, gross, icky, because they're seeing this creature woman in a donkey skin, and they think that she's disgusting and filthy, and they're like, ugh, they're so gross. And while she's passing them, she's like, please, can I just work somewhere? Like, if you could just give me some work, like, I'm a great worker. All I need to do is, like, work so I can survive. If somebody could just help me out, like, help a bitch out. And everyone's rejecting her left and right, left and right. And eventually, she gets to the lady of the house, who happens to run this farm. Turns out this farm actually belongs to one of the kings in the country that she's in. And they're like, yeah, this is the third farm of the king so-and-so, blah, blah, blah. They don't give any names in the story. I don't have any names to give you. But the lady takes pity on her because she's like, yeah, everyone's talking about how gross and stinky and awful you are. And I agree, you kind of are gross and stinky and awful, but I feel like you're just an unfortunate soul who could maybe use a break. So, the kindness of this woman, she invites her to stay in a little tiny shed on the side of the house. She's like, you can't stay in the main house, of course, because you have a stinky donkey skin on. But I'll give you some work. So she gives her a little place, a little special room, and they give her the task of washing dishcloths and cleaning up after the pigs. And she does it so well and so diligently that eventually, like, all the snide comments from the servants and the other farmhands cease, because they're like, oh, she's actually a really hard worker and she's making us look like a bunch of chumps. So we're not going to talk shit about Donkey Skin anymore. And they call her Donkey Skin because we're really creative when we name people, especially when we use the name to make fun of them as their physical names. But after a while, they start to trust her, or the wife starts to trust her with more and more tasks. So they trust her with, taking care of stuff inside the house, like cleaning the toilets and washing mirrors. But they also trust her with, watching the geese and doing that kind of stuff. So she takes on more and more roles and becomes sort of essential to the functional management of this farm. And because she's there, being so efficient and diligent, everything is running even better than it ever did before, to the point where this particular farmhouse is actually sort of coming up in the ranks of farmhouses owned by the king, so to speak. So in addition to, like, being this super diligent worker, she would get one day off a week, because that's, what they give the help, one day off a week. And on that day, she would lock herself in her little tiny hut, and she would take a bath, and then she would open up her chest. So she'd take her little magic wand, tap it out, get the chest to come up, and then she would try on all of her beautiful dresses and just observe herself in her mirror and just enjoy a day where she doesn't have a stinky donkey skin on her and nobody thinks she's ugly, and just enjoy, like, a quiet moment in her house. Kind of like Melusine. And just, enjoy a day of dress up and feeling pretty again. And then when the day was done, she'd put all of her dresses away, put them back in the chest, and then don her donkey skin once more to go back to her life of service and, her usual business. This went on for some time. She lived her regular life. She got very settled into this routine. And one day, she happened to see the prince made a visit to the farm. So the prince is doing his princely duties. He's going out, meeting the people, rubbing elbows with all the people who help, provide food and stuff for the castle. And he passes through the farm, and he's talking to everybody. And she can see him from her little hut. And she's like, oh my God, he's so good looking. Absolutely gagged. And as she's watching, she's not noticing just that he's only good looking, but he's also really nice to all the other servants and farmhands there. And she's like, oh, he's just so kind. He's so gracious. He's so sweet to the people who work for him. And she's like a little bit, down bad for this prince that she sees as he's walking through here. Like, she's so down bad that she's like, I wouldn't even ask him for a fancy dress. He could give me, like, a sackcloth, and I would still be, like, over the moon because he gave it to me. But you might be asking, why is she in her hut while everybody else is out there, like, rubbing elbows with the prince? Well, she's in her hut because it's her special day off, right? So she does her regular routine once she's done thirsting after the prince. She gets all bathed up. She does her, like, whole routine, her whole beauty skincare routine. She puts on the dazzling, shining, golden dress, and, she prances around her little hut and has her day. But what happens is, as the prince is walking through, passing through the farm, talking to everybody, a little shine catches his eyes, and it's actually a little bit of light coming out of the keyhole of the hut that Donkey Skin lives in. So he goes over there, and he looks through the keyhole, and he sees the most beautiful woman he's ever seen with the most beautiful dress, but he can't really stand there and, like, gaze too long because the dress is so dazzling, it dazzles the eyes. So he has to keep looking away, looking back in to reaffirm that he is in fact seeing this goddess among women inside this little hut. And every time he thinks about it, he's like, I'm just going to open the door, I'm going to walk in, I'm going to tell her how beautiful she is. But he's like, oh, I can't do that because, like, that's rude, and I probably would scare her, and I don't want to be that guy. Like, that's a lot. So he decides instead to go back home and then complain to his father about how there aren't any parties. There's no good parties, Dad. There's no good parties. We're such a rich and wealthy kingdom. You think we'd have more parties, but there's no good parties. And the dad's like, what are you driving at? And he starts to get a little sad and a little depressed. And he's like, I just wish we had a really good party, Dad. And his dad's like, oh, okay. Cool, yeah, a party. And he starts, moping around the castle, and then he starts asking the people in the castle, like, hey, there's this really beautiful, like super hot girl out there living in this little tiny ramshackle hut. What's that about? And as he's telling the servants, they're like, donkey skin? Are you talking about donkey skin? No, that ugly, like, squalid little, like, swamp creature that wears the skin of a donkey out there? That's Donkey Skin's hut, sire. So, like, there's no way that's a beautiful woman. Like, you must have been dazzled by the stench of Donkey Skin. And the prince is like, Donkey Skin? Stench? Are we talking about the same thing? But every person he goes to tells him, no, that's the ugly little donkey skin in that hut. Because they're all freaking rude, you guys. Everybody who works in this castle is rude. But the prince is like, I don't believe this. Like, this is, you guys are playing a game. Like, this is a prank or something. This is, you're trying to gaslight me right now. I feel very gaslit because I know what I saw. And you guys are all telling me it's like Gollum in there. And I don't believe that. So, because he's feeling a little bit gaslit and a little bit melancholy because the girl of his dreams is just out of reach, he continues to complain about the ball thing, but he also continues to get more depressed. So then eventually his mother, because it has to be his mother, is like, oh my god, my darling son, what's the matter? And he's like, there's no good parties, Mom. And the mom, unlike the dad, took her son's like complaint to heart. So she throws a beautiful, lavish ball. And when Donkey Skin hears about this ball, she's like, I think I can swing this. Nobody will know it's me without my donkey skin on. So the night of the ball, she tosses off her donkey skin. She gets all dolled up. She puts on her dazzling dress and she goes up there to see what's up. She wants to have a party. She misses having courtly balls and parties and things like that. So she goes to the party, and the prince is like, oh my god, it's the girl that I happen to be obsessed with. So he's like on her, like, all night. They're talking, they're chatting it up. She's like, oh my god, I can't believe the prince is talking to me. He's like, oh my god, I can't believe that I'm talking to this girl. They're so down bad for each other, and neither of them have any idea that that's the case. And they spend so much time talking that eventually it gets really late. And eventually, the prince's parents are like, hey, son, why don't you talk to somebody else tonight? And he's like, just 1 second. Let me talk to my mom and dad real quick because they don't understand that I'm about to fucking propose. He doesn't say that to her. That's in his head. But he goes back to talk to his parents, and she's like, ooh, it is late. And I do have to work tomorrow. So she dips. Like, Donkey Skin just dips. And when the prince turns around, his beautiful, dazzling, charming goddess of his dreams disappeared. So he's like, what? And he happens to see, when, you know, he looks at his window over the land, a little bit of shiny light disappearing back to the farm, back to the little tiny hut. And he's like, I know that that's where you are. I know what I saw. Everyone keeps telling me that it's a donkey skin person down there, but I know that they're wrong. The love of my life is down there in that hut. So what happens is he goes back to the hut, but he never sees the beautiful woman there. He does, however, finally get to see, finally lay his eyes on the creature known as Donkey Skin, and he's like, ooh, ew, oh, gross, ooh, I gotta get away from this. That's not the vision of beauty I had in my mind. And while he's not outrightly rude to her, he is definitely internally very rude to Donkey Skin in his brain. So he goes back to his house, and he continues to spiral into the deepest of depressions. So depressed is he that he's like, actually can't get out of bed. I'm so upset because the woman of my dreams is gone, disappeared, replaced by a little horrid creature, and I don't even think if they're the same person because that's impossible because I saw them both with my eyes. One was disgusting, one was not. So he's spiraling out. He's depressed. He's bereft without the woman of his dreams. And the whole time Donkey Skin is just going about her business like nothing happened. And she's like, I got to talk to him and he was so sweet. And I love that guy. I really hope that like maybe there's a chance for us because he was just so cool. And meanwhile the prince is like, doom, gloom, misery. My life is over. To the point where like all the doctors in all the land are coming around to check on him. And they're like, we don't know what's wrong with this guy. We think he's dying. And because they think he's dying, his mother is absolutely beside herself. And she's like, please tell us what you want. Anything that will help you feel better. Like, please tell us. You want a beautiful woman? We'll bring you the most beautiful woman in the world. Do you want to marry a slave? Like, we'll let you marry a slave. Anything you want, just tell us, please. Because I want you to live, my darling sweet boy. And the prince is, like, not speaking. He's, like, just... I'm so depressed I cannot even utter words about my depression. And the mom is like, do you want something to eat? We'll bring you delicacies from around the world. Anything you could possibly wish for. We'll travel to the ends of the earth for you, my darling sweet boy. Like, could you please just tell me what you need? And he's like, no, I can't. I have to lay in my bed and have this tantrum because I can't have what I want. And the mom's like, I will give you anything you want. Anything. And he's like, actually, the only thing I really want right now, the only thing that would make me feel better is if Donkey Skin made me a cake with her own hands. And the queen goes, what's a donkey skin? So she goes and she asks the servants, and the servants are like, that little dumb, ugly thing in the back that we all make fun of, but not to her face? Donkey Skin? That thing? She's really dirty and stinky. And the queen's like, he wants dirty, grubby, stinky person to make him a cake with her bare hands? Anything to save my son. So she tells them, go ask Donkey Skin to make the prince a cake. So they do. They go find Donkey Skin. They're like, hey, the prince has asked for you specifically to make him a cake. And she's like, oh, okay. I actually really like that guy. I would love to make him a cake. And everyone's else like, ooh, I can't believe I would never eat at her house. She's so gross. So they all leave. And Donkey Skin goes back to her little hut. She gets all cleaned up. She puts on a nice dress, probably the blue one, and a smock, a little apron situation because she doesn't want to get it dirty. And after doing her entire skincare and beauty regimen, she's now ready to make a cake. She puts all her gold, her jewels, all her stuff on so she can make this cake, which seems like a lot to me, but whatever makes her comfortable when she bakes, right? She gets the flour, she does the mixing, icing, all the things. And behind the closed doors of her little tiny hut, she bakes the most spectacular little tiny cake. And we don't know. Nobody really knows for sure if it was just because she was working so hard and so fast to make this cake for the prince, or if she did this on purpose, but she accidentally loses one of her rings inside of the cake. And so when they take the cake to the king, he suddenly has developed the prince. When they take the cake to the prince, he suddenly develops an appetite and scarfs down this cake because he hasn't been eating this entire time. He's just been laying here wasting away. And the doctor's like, oh, he got his appetite back. He must be feeling better. But he manages to nearly swallow, but not quite, the ring. And when he pulls it out of his mouth, he's like, oh my god, this was on the finger of the beautiful woman that I am in love with, so it must be Donkey Skin. So he keeps it, and then he puts the little ring underneath his pillow, and he thinks about how Donkey Skin could possibly be the woman of his dreams. There's some kind of overlap there, but he can't figure it out because Donkey Skin is so wretched, and the beautiful woman is literally a goddess among women, so the Venn diagram is not meeting in the middle the way that he wants. And he continues to get a little more depressed, and the doctor's like, god damn it, we thought he was getting better, but he's just getting worse. So then they decide that the only cure for his illness is to get married. So they tell that to the queen. And the queen goes, okay, you have to get married because the doctors think that's the only thing that's going to make you better. Doesn't seem like medical science to me, but, we're going to try anything because I want you to recover. And he's like, okay, but I'm only going to get married to whoever this ring fits. So he shows the queen the ring, and she's like, okay, that's interesting. And the king's back there like, you freaking encourage him so much, and he does shenanigans like this all the goddamn time. And the queen's like, shush, 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 darling, sweet, precious angel baby boy. So she decides that they're going to do it. They go and they round up all the noble women of court. And, every wealthy woman, every noble woman they can find. And they try this ring on. Turns out, all their fingers are too tiny to fit the ring. They're too dainty, too delicate to fit the ring. Then they went to all the working girls. They were like, round up all the girls who work. Bring them here. Let's try it out. So, they try it. Their fingers, too big. Too big for the ring. So then they're like, okay. All right. bring us all the servants, all the kitchen help, all the maids, all the slaves, anything, any other girl remaining, bring her to us. Turns out their fingers even bigger because they also don't fit the ring. And it gets to the point where people start to try to come up with ways to like trick the auditors of the ring into believing that they had the ring, including but not limited to trying to use vegetables as substitutes for their ring finger. Some women would try to scrape the skin off their fingers. Trigger warning, that's upsetting. And other times they would just start to cut little pieces off their fingers to see if they could make it fit into the ring. And they were like, stop bleeding on the ring, please. That's disgusting. And also we're tired of having to wash it after every one of you people try this. So it gets to the point where they've done the rich people, the working class, and the lower class, and the lower class. And nobody fits the ring. And they've basically tried every single woman in the kingdom, except now they're down in the scullery with the last of the help in the kingdom, being like, well, none of these fit either, except Donkey Skin is there in the corner, in the far corner, and they're like, okay, well, I guess that's everybody. And the prince is like, what about her? And they're like, oh, no, ew. Donkey Skin? No, she can't be the woman who would own such a fine thing. The woman of your dreams that you've been talking about this entire time. She's disgusting. And the prince is like, why not? You said you were going to try everybody in the kingdom, every woman. Donkey Skin is a woman as far as I know. I'm saying that with confidence, but I'm starting to have doubts. And they're like, but prince, ew. And he's like, no, bring her here. Try the ring. So they do. They call Donkey Skin over, and they're like, your hand, Donkey Skin. Do we have gloves? Does somebody have gloves? And when Donkey Skin pulls her hand out from underneath the Donkey Skin, it is the little tiny, little dainty hand. And they're like, ooh, that doesn't match. One of these things is not like the other, because that hand shouldn't belong to somebody like you. Gross, disgusting Donkey Skin. Turns out it's her. It's her ring. It fits. It fits perfectly. So they're like, oh, there it is. There's your queen, Donkey Skin. And the prince is like, I don't see the vision, but it does fit, and it's the only one to fit, and we've checked everybody, so congratulations, you're the love of my life, we're getting married. And she's like, cool, awesome, amazing. And so the prince is like, okay, well, let's go meet my parents. And she's like, oh, if you would just give me a second to get dressed before I meet the king and queen, that would be cool. And the prince is like, oh, you have something other than a donkey skin? And she's like, I actually do. Yeah, I have more than one outfit. And he's like, oh, okay, yeah, fantastic. Go get dressed. I'll meet you there. So Donkey Skin goes back to her hut. She gets her chest. She does her whole beauty routine. So everybody is waiting for 3 hours for her to get ready. And she appears in court in her sun dress, in her full dazzling splendor. Everyone is like, oh my god, that woman is so freaking beautiful. The prince is over there fist pumping the air yes, I knew it. I knew she was the one. This is the woman of my dreams I've been telling you guys about, but nobody believed me. It was Donkey Skin all along. And the king and queen are super pleased that it isn't actually the wretch Donkey Skin, but a beautiful woman. And, she presents herself to the court. Everyone's like, oh my god, amazing. Let's start getting ready for this wedding at once, immediately. They must be wed because they're so goddamn attractive. And turns out, while they're doing all the wedding preparations, while they're calling all the people to come to the land for this wedding, a neighboring king happens to come by. It's Donkey Skin's father. So he gets there, he looks at her next to the prince, and he's like, oh my god, and the light of her dress is dazzling his eyes, and he's like, this is my daughter, and I am so sorry, my daughter, I lost my mind temporarily, I didn't really want to marry you, I lost my head completely, will you ever forgive me? And she's like, oh yeah, totally, I'll forgive you now that I've traded up in the world and secured my future and I don't have to be afraid of you anymore. I will absolutely forgive you for chasing me away from my homeland. And turns out the king and queen, upon hearing that she's actually the daughter of a king, are even more relieved because they're like, oh, thank god. Not only is she pretty, she's also nobility. We can let the donkey skin thing go to the side. Nobody talk about donkey skin anymore. In fact, throw the donkey skin away. We're not going to mention it. She's a proper princess, so things are good. Things are great now. And at the wedding, the fairy godmother shows up. She gets her wand back, apparently, because, you know, you're not going to leave that out there in the open forever and ever and ever. And she tells everybody the whole story. She's like, let me just tell you the tale of Donkey Skin. So when everyone has all the context and all the clues and they know the whole story, they're like, whoa, amazing. What an epic. This is fantastic. And they all live happily ever after. La-di-da-di-da at the end. I don't know how to properly end stories now, apparently. But yeah, they all live happily ever after. The prince and Donkey Skin are absolutely in love. They have a fantastic marriage. And then they become the power couple of their part of the world. Because how could they not? And that's the end of Donkey Skin. The story comes to us from Charles Perrault. From the old-time stories told by Master Charles Perrault. Who is a French author who wrote a big fairy tale collection way long ago. He also did a rendition of like Beauty and the Beast, which I've talked about at some point. He also did a rendition of Sleeping Beauty. Like, he picked up a lot of tales, retold a lot of stories. This is one of them, and it's this story is interesting to me because it ends with a moral, because Charles Perrault was really good or really bad, depending on your perspective, of adding in a moral at the end of every story. And sometimes the morals were, like, straightforward, and you were like, yeah, totally, I get it. Other times you were like, why that, Charles? Why that? That doesn't seem to be the moral of the story. And, like, in this case, with Donkey Skin, the moral of the story, or that he writes, is that it is better to undergo the greatest hardships rather to fail in one's duty, that virtue may sometimes seem ill-fated, but will always triumph in the end. Which is basically like, you gotta put up with a bunch of bullshit rather than suck or like break promises or your responsibilities. But if you put up with all the bullshit, it'll reward you eventually at some point in time. And that's just not the lesson that I took from the story. Because it doesn't really seem like a good story in that regard. It's basically just kind of telling you to, like, put up with the bullshit that men put upon young women, and eventually, if you work hard enough, things will get better. But, like, she shouldn't have been in that situation in the first place, Charles. So I feel like maybe not the moral of the story, at least in my version. But I like the story. I like that it's a Cinderella story. It has the elements that we're familiar with Cinderella. Basically, you know, her being called after the thing that she happens to be covered in. And, you know, the whole hunt for the proper princess. One via a shoe, one via a ring. I do like this story, I think, a little bit better than the traditional Cinderella story. Because there's just an extra element of, like, her working very hard to, like, achieve this, but also, like, trying to use cleverness to get out of a bad situation, and then that not being the solution, and her having to, like, sort of just give up everything. Like, it just, she went through a lot more, I feel like, than Cinderella did. Like, Cinderella, of course, is also having her own struggles. I'm not going to compare the two, but, like, I like this version of the Cinderella tale better than the original version, which is why I wanted to share it here. But also, like, I just think this story is interesting. There's, it's an Arns Thompson Uther type 510B, and it's actually the story, it's like, I think the name of the category is, like, Uncommon Love, or Bad Love, or something like that. It's something where, like, a negative to the love, and this story is the top story that, like, launched this entire section, so it's the reason that type of story actually exists. And it all has to do with these stories of, like, fathers who want to marry their daughters because of some weird thing that the queen previously had sort of stipulated, whether it was, like, somebody as pretty as me, or someone with the same hair color as me, or something along those lines. That's where this story, like, launched all these other stories to be all in this one category tale type. And I think it's an interesting story because, like, in the grounds of, like, incest, that's never been okay. Like, people have never been okay with that, even though it seems like something very normalized. It wasn't. It was just one of those things that, like, noble people would do, and people would be like, I don't really think that's a good idea, but, like, I guess. And, like, a lot of that, like, preservation of bloodlines bullshit, but, in the context of this tale, it being sort of like an obligatory thing, and being put upon this princess as sort of like your duty to fulfill, sort of rings to how much control men would have over women in these situations, because she really didn't have a right to refuse the king of the land, let alone her father. So she had to try to come up with sort of clever ways to get out of it, and when all else failed, she had to run away to sort of avoid this. And they kind of, like, the moral of the story sort of paints it in a bad light, to be like, you gotta stick to your duties and do the things properly, otherwise, like, you won't get the payoff that you deserve in the end. But if you work really hard and suffer a lot, you'll get your payoffs, and that's, like, not a thing. But I don't know, all of those concepts and ideas are really interesting to me, which is why I find this story to be such an interesting story, and I wanted to share it with you guys, because eventually she does succeed, she does prosper, and she does find somebody who did like her, granted for a superficial reason at first, but they did end up, like, hitting it off at the ball, and, you know, both of them mutually being attracted to each other is also a benefit, it's also a bonus. It just took a little bit of a longer roundabout way to sort of come together. And I do like the idea that, like, the prince isn't a jerk the entire time, because there is a story in this same tale type category called Coat of Many Furs. It also has another name that I can't pronounce. But essentially, in addition to asking for all the dresses, she also asked for a coat made from the skin of every animal in the woods. Like, one of every type, not every single animal entirely in the woods, but one of every kind. So she ends up with, like, 1,000 different furs sewn into this super large coat. And it works the same as a donkey skin. While she's wearing the coat, people just see her as an unfortunate, ugly wretch, and they don't see her as a princess. But when she goes into service, instead of going to a farm, she goes into service inside of the prince's, like, palace. And one of her jobs every night is to go take the prince's shoes off and, like, I don't know, rub his feet or some shit, clean his boots, essentially. And when she goes up to his room every night to go get his boots, he throws them at her head. And he treats her like kind of the same way that the prince in The Little Mermaid treats the Little Mermaid, as, like, a dumb foundling. He treats her like that, like she's just a dumb servant. But, like, when she meets him, because they have the ball 3 times, so she gets to wear one dress at night every time she goes to meet him, he treats her fantastically. He's like, oh yeah, of course, I love you, amazing, you're beautiful, all the things. But when she's a servant, he treats her like garbage, which is why I didn't tell that version of the story, because I don't like that version of the story, because at least in this version with Donkey Skin, he treats the servants like they're people. Whereas in the other one, he didn't. And I'm like, garbage man, does garbage things. And yet somehow they still get married and live happily ever after. And it's never brought up that he treats his servants like trash in Coat of Many Furs. So, yeah. That's going to be it from you guys. We've made it to the end of this very long Storycraft. I appreciate your faces. And I'll catch you guys all in the next one. Let me know what you guys thought in the comments below. And like I said, if there's a story you want to hear, you can definitely leave that in the comments as well, because I'm always taking requests. And I'll catch you guys all in the next one. Until then, happy crafting. Bye!